If ever you get the urge to photograph the graphic shapes or details that emerge from a graffiti wall, you are almost definitely referencing either photographer Aaron Siskind or his painter friend Franz Kline. They were both part of the abstract expressionist movement that was also referred to as the New York School during the 1940s and 50s. The painter's work was characterized by strongly gestured brushstrokes, mark-making, and spontaneity. During this video, I will alternate between images made by both artists. Franz Kline initially painted landscapes and cityscapes, but after moving to New York City, he befriended Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock and soon started developing his own style of abstract painting. He became known for his muscular black and white compositions. He was around the age of 40 when he started to gain recognition and was soon to be considered one of the principal players within the New York School. Aaron Siskind was also around 40 when he met and befriended Franz Kline, Martha Rothko, and others who were spearheading the abstract expressionist movement. He'd been teaching English at public school and he had a real interest in poetry, but he soon realized that he was able to communicate in a poetic fashion through his photographs. The artist and art critic Elaine de Kooning described Siskind as the painter's photographer. His personal friendship with Franz Kline and his appreciation of the painter's aesthetic were the most significant influences on his photographic development. While driving through Mexico, Siskind noticed for the first time how the graffiti there reminded him of his friend's paintings. Now, 70 years later, we've become so familiar with his photographs, and there's also an oversaturation of images of graffiti in general. But at the time that Siskind was working, almost no one would have considered graffiti walls to be interesting subject matter. It was only through Siskind's exposure to Kline's work that he began to see how visually powerful images could be. He was tapping into the way of seeing that was only made accessible because of the acceptance of the abstract aesthetic of the New York School. Critics have described both Kline and Siskind's work as being a form of calligraphy or symbolic representation, but both would disagree with this description. Neither of them were actually trying to infuse their work with any hidden meanings. As Kline said, he made work that only referenced itself. He wanted viewers to simply interact with the marks and compositions themselves. The meaning, therefore, comes from an engagement with the paint gestures and the way that the tonal variations and shapes emerge out of the painting itself. Kline was able to communicate his feelings through the type of stroke that he made. Some were bold and direct, while others were more subtle. Likewise, Siskind was capturing the vitality of the graffiti artist's gestures. Graffiti is such an overt form of public self-expression, whether they're announcing their love for the girl next door or protesting for an end of factory farming. The intent is apparent not only in the external messaging, but also within the mark-making itself. The act of painting on a public surface is also inevitably done in a clandestine or impassioned manner. Siskind and Kline were both primarily interested in shape, line, and tone, and the way in which their own feelings shaped the image and became part of the work itself. For Siskind, his subject matter wasn't the painted wall, rather it was the details that he isolated within his viewfinder, and also the choosing of crops that best formed relationships that were impactful. Unlike the painter, he was limited to what he was able to find in the outside world. Kline chose to use oil-based house paints. They were cheaper and he liked the textures that clearly exposed his brushstrokes. Siskind was also photographing details that were made by the same type of cheap paint materials. Commercial paint products made up most of the graffiti that one found in those days. Spray cans only became readily available in the 70s. Kline's sister said that from a very young age he was always sketching. As he started developing his abstract aesthetic, he shifted to using telephone books, painting inkwash onto these printed pages. This allowed him to play with any idea that popped into his head without caution or financial concern. He could also tear them up and combine them into new compositions. During his career, he filled up loads and loads of these telephone books. It was only when he projected some of these sketches onto his studio wall that he realized that he could develop these ideas into large format paintings. Siskind's process was similar in that he would experiment with the positive and negative spaces until he could find a combination that held a visual force. After Kline's death in 1962, Siskind created several series of photographs, each titled Homage to Franz Kline. At the same time that he drew on the work of painters, he too was influencing fellow artists. Willem de Kooning kept one of Siskind's photographs close at hand while he was working on his famous Women series. Siskind was also not the only abstract photographer working during that period. He developed a very close relationship with photographer Harry Callahan. Callahan would often focus on everyday subjects like leaves in water or grass strands buried in the snow or telephone wires spanned across the sky. Often his subjects were cropped in a way that just fragments appeared, making it unclear what the original object was. So without context, his subjects appeared more like ink and pencil marks. And much like Siskind, he preferred the harsh black and white tones in his work. After an invitation from Callahan, Siskind started teaching photography at the Illinois Institute of Technology and Design in Chicago. He continued to teach for another 20 years. Siskind had a one-man show in 1965 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it was John Zukowski who selected the images for the show. It's amazing how often Zukowski's name pops up when one's talking about the greats of photography. Aaron Siskind is rightfully counted among the pioneers of abstract expressionism, and also as a photographer who expanded the potential of the medium for communicating both emotions and feelings. He passed away in 1991, outliving his close friend Franz Kline by 3 decades. I hope you enjoyed that video, and thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Is it over yet?
Yes, it is good. It really is.
What are they?
Well,
and find out what the future holds in store.
Is it over yet?